My talk this evening is one that comes with great hesitation. Because the danger of it being misunderstood maybe far outweighs the information that I would like to share in this talk this evening. And I must preface this particular lecture with the idea that nothing that I will present and share with you this evening is a study that I have, that we are together, is information that has been stored in an ancient vault, and only because we live in the age of Aquarius do I feel that this information is necessary and vital. And when I say that I feel that it is necessary and vital, I must again qualify my words and repeat and say that mission was thrust upon me, and sometimes I even had regrets as to the responsibility. But nevertheless, here we are this evening, and only once before have I divulged this kind of information, which I know might be very disturbing to some of you, might even be rejected outright, but nevertheless, I feel my responsibility as the Dean of the Center to always provide people with information. Let them choose, let them decide, rather than keep this information for fear of where this information might lead people. The subject this evening is anti-Semitism, or the rise of Neo-Nazism. Needless to say, this afternoon there was even a call, it may have been a prank, but indicating that they were not very happy with this evening's discussion. It does provoke discussion, and there is a great debate going on now around the world in all Jewish communities. The great debate is as follows. Is it best to downplay the incidents, while there are very many, just close to 3,000 anti-Semitic incidents in the past year, just in Germany alone, that throughout this globe, there are many incidents. And maybe the best approach is to ignore it. If we ignore it, there is a good possibility, a chance that it might fade away. And then there are those who claim that to ignore it is merely to feed fuel to the fire. Because if these people are left unchecked, those who might be sitting on the fence, those who are not certain as to what constitutes anti-Semitism, might be persuaded that this cause of anti-Semitism might possibly be a worthwhile one. And so this debate continues. Without any resolution, obviously. And only recently, and that's where my first lecture originated, was in our branch in Toronto, where there's a little enclave outside of Toronto known as Little Berlin. Supposedly, the former Nazis who had the ability or the assistance to emigrate to Canada, settled in this city. And there, on numerous occasions, there are rallies, neo-Nazi rallies that take place on a regular basis. And of course, the Jews of Canada are in a dilemma. And the great debate goes on. Do we ignore the presence of these people, who are huge in numbers, incidentally, or do we begin to demonstrate? Do we begin to request from government officials to enact new laws, place laws on the books, or enforce the old laws, so as to curtail the activities of these groups? And then we approach the ultimate question: free speech. Is the infringement on one group, however despicable they might be in the minds of some, minds of many, do we have the right to deny free speech? Because there is the noted historian David Irving. I'm not sure whether he's Jewish or not, but he is supposedly a noted British historian. And he has documented what he considers to be reliable sources, that in the first place, Hitler wasn't such a bad guy. And secondly, the Holocaust, as presented, featuring the extermination of 6 million Jews, never existed. He considers that act as one that had never taken place. Yes, in all wars, as in World War II, he claims, there were many, many victims, many, many casualties, and amongst those were also Jews. And this man has been given the privilege, under the right of free speech, to espouse his feelings, his knowledge. And so the debate continues. What I would like to bring to your attention, and especially for those who have studied Kabbalah, is this idea of anti-Semitism. Something about an idea directed towards Jews. Where did it originate? How does it, over the centuries, I should say over the millenniums, does this kind of idea perpetuate itself to the extent that there isn't a generation that the idea of anti-Semitism has not come to the forefront? Who started this movement? It certainly didn't begin in Germany. Maybe because the Holocaust was a demonstration of the severity of the effects of anti-Semitism. To where this kind of hatred could lead is that we place so much emphasis on the Holocaust, on what happened in Germany in the years 1933 to 1945. However, there was pogroms, not in Germany, for other reasons. There was in past Jewish history inquisitions. And then we even have something that we refer to as the blood libels. The idea that it was necessary for Jews in their observance of the Passover holiday, there was a requirement that a non-Jewish child be murdered and to sap its blood for the ritual of Passover. This has continued on for centuries, not one passing, fleeting idea, but for centuries. This kind of idea persisted. But in Kabbalah, we ask the basic question: why? Why? Is there something wrong with the Jew? Does he in fact have horns? And if you've ever been out in the Midwest where they've never seen a Jew, some of them really believe that Jews have horns. After all, if you've ever seen the famous Moses picture, you see him with horns. Doesn't that depict the typical Jew? Ideas that you don't hear about Frenchmen, don't hear about Mexicans, or South Africans, or Australians, or the Chinese, only about the Jews. Without a country up until 48, for 2,000 years wandering, obviously not a very strong political force to be dealt with or reckoned with. Where did this start? Unfortunately, in my research, in conventional theories, I haven't come up with any reasonable idea as to why it exists. And tonight, while it might be unpleasant, the source references that I will refer to will be those that you can reject, will be those that you can be angry at, but not me. Not me. Because again, I have only been looking, as I'm sure most of you have been looking, for some answers to this kind of almost to be considered a disease, a plague upon the Jewish people. The idea of anti-Semitism goes so far as to include a world Jewish conspiracy. A world Jewish conspiracy. Meaning that somehow, somewhere, a convention of Jews, famous Jews, any kind of Jews, had a conference and somehow decided on how they can best create recessions in the world, disease in the world, destruction in the world, devastation in the world, because this is the world Jewish conspiracy, which I must say, not only in the United States, where today 1 out of every 5 non-Jews believe that the Jew is responsible for most of the world's ills. Right here, that has been a recent report by the Anti-Defamation League of B'nai B'rith, that 1 out of every 5 U.S. citizens believe that the woes of the United States are to be attributed to this Jewish conspiracy. The Jewish bankers, for the benefit of their pockets, create recessions. There is one basic difference between the rise of Neo-Nazism today as opposed to even the years of 1933 and 1945, and that is, whereas in those years, one might say it was localized, It was centered around Germany on the European continent. Today, wherever I travel, and in almost every country around the world, anti-Semitism is on the upsurge. We have only recently acquired a tape done underground by a German, and it will be shown here in the next few weeks, a film taken by this individual to create a documentary for the movement. And he in turn took that documentary, which covered every country in this globe, on the activities of Neo-Nazism, on its organization, and whether you travel to Brazil, France, Australia, Japan, United States, of course, and Canada, there is a network of people that appear at all times, creating this vast network that one day, they believe that they can rid this earth of what they call the Jewish disease. It is documented. Shows people, known neo-Nazis, where they have appeared in all countries around the world. What keeps this movement so alive? What is even more remarkable is the idea that countries almost without Jewish citizenry profess the same feelings of anti-Semitism. Now, we know that there are times when we've been hurt, and maybe we've come to hate individuals, justifiably or not. But where this type of individual, the Jew, does not exist, how do we recognize, how do we account for the presence of anti-Semitism? Where Jews are not in high office, Jews do not control the finances of a particular country, and yet this idea pervades throughout the entire country. How do we explain that? And to my dismay, in all of my research into the conventional approaches to anti-Semitism, not once have I come across even a theory as to why this illness persists. But rather, we're all concerned with how can we do away with this pervading feeling of anti-Semitism, and therefore we have an anti-defamation league in the United States and similar organizations around the world, on how we can keep this illness at bay. And yet I have never come across an idea as to why this particular illness subsists, exists, and never seems to fade away. Why should we even believe that demonstrations of today will have any effect as those that when I demonstrated in 1941 and 42? I can assure you that those demonstrations, by large numbers, did not have the effect of even removing one Jewish soul from a gas oven. And yet, this is what we propose again today, as if demonstrations will remove the endless, education, monuments will remind the non-Jew of his atrocities. But he's gone one step ahead of us. He says, you built monuments when those atrocities never existed. He denies our existence in these awful places that monuments have been erected. And therefore, much of the monument, most of the monuments that spread over the dark areas of Europe have become non-existent. Obviously, we Jews haven't learned the lesson that the approach that we again suggest today have already been suggested over thousands of years. And for whatever reason, this illness, if we might attribute it as an illness, somehow persists. It's almost like the cockroach. As much as we try to eliminate that cockroach, somehow he always seems to return. Is there any hope? The answer is, there got to be a hope, and I didn't bring you here this evening just to create a little fear and terror in your hearts. Not what most people concerned with this matter are doing this day, is to bring to the forefront the dangers of anti-Semitism. But what I would like to share with you this evening is where it all started. And I have never heard that mentioned before. And more importantly, that you will walk out of this auditorium this evening knowing that you and I have the remedy. You and I tonight will have the antidote by which once and for all we can absolutely eliminate that disease known as anti-Semitism. I would like to preface the information by something that we have always discussed, in which indicates where our consciousness lies. What happens when someone is under stress, under pressure? Grab for the Tylenol. Is there a physician or medical researcher alive today that claims that you have removed the origin or the cause of the stress or headache? Or are we prone to the removal of symptoms? You can't treat cancer with a lollipop, and everyone understands that. So too can we not, nor can we afford to treat serious matters as anti-Semitism, treating the symptoms, hoping that the cause will ultimately disappear, because it never works that way. It is like Jerusalem. For centuries, Jews have imagined that Jerusalem is the holy city. And if you ask a Jew, why is Jerusalem the holy city? His answer will be, because the holy temple was located there. But the Zohar goes on to raise the question, why was the holy temple there in the first place? Physical evidence, critical evidence, is never a cause. Just as no human activity can be manifested without a prior metaphysical thought. And so too, if we are to seek out and investigate whatever conditions they might be, whether it be anti-Semitism or whether they be in the medical field, we must seek out the origin. And so Jerusalem is the holy city not because of the holy temple, but because there is a metaphysical force in Jerusalem, a force unseen, unheard, yet exists. And the temple was the result of that force being there, so as to be able to channel this force, or the light force of God, for the welfare of all human beings. And when the temple did exist, there was peace on earth, and there was goodwill towards men. The moment that temple disappeared, the moment we no longer could tap in and access into the light force of God, evils of the world as we know it today began. We are discussing Neo-Nazism. Where did the word originate? A question that a good research scholar must ask before he begins the subject. Where is it mentioned? How far can we go? And I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, are beginning to wonder, didn't it begin in Germany in 1933? And the answer, my friends, is no. No. That word began 3,400 years ago. And I can be that precise. 3,400 years ago? You mean before there was a Germany? You mean before there was a Hitler? That word existed? The word Nazi existed? Where? In some ancient books? No, my friends. In your local bookstore. Local bookstore? How could that miss our attention? How come we never noticed that idea? How come we never noticed the word? To your dismay and maybe disappointment, I've just opened the Torah that was given on Mount Sinai 3,400 years ago. Chapter 14. The word Nazi, of course, is not mentioned in the English language. But obviously we know that the Torah is written in Hebrew. And for those of you who know how to spell the Hebrew word Nazi, Nun Aleph Tzadik Yud, and that is not a word, that some librarian or some Hebrew-speaking teacher decided is the way to spell this word, this fearing word, Nazi. The word. When you see skinheads, if you see a pack of them, I don't doubt that there are many of you that fear and walk across the street. chapter 14 in Numbers. Verse 23. After a long discussion that Moses had with God, and when God in verse 11 says, until when will we have to deal with this despicable nation? Incidentally, for those of you who don't know whom Moses and God was referring to, I have to tell you, it was discussing the Jew. And God says to Moses, Ad ana yena atsuni ha'amazeh, until when shall this nation continue to despise me? And then there's a long discourse of what to do with these creatures. And when I say creatures, that's the way the Torah describes the Jew here. Without going into the history and going into the background, what brought this kind of discussion into the Torah? Where God finally says, these people shall never enter the land of Israel. They shall all perish. V'kolena atzai, nun aleph tzadik yud. Are there some Israelis here? Is that the way you spell the word Nazi? Nun aleph tzadik yud? Is there anyone who disagrees? Then we have, I know there are several Israelis here, and I believe they're all in agreement. That's the way you spell the word Nazi. Nazi is a despicable person. And so it began not in 1933 in Germany, but began 3,400 years ago. And its reference was not to the skinheads. Its reference was not to the Spanish inquisitors. Its reference was not to the people in Russia who reveled in their pogroms in annihilating Jews. No, that word originates right here in the Bible. Consequently, for we Jews at least, that word means a despicable person. And maybe that's why for us, or for we Jews, when we look at people who have hatred in their minds, as these Jews did, they're referred to as Nazis. In fact, and this came to me as a shock the first time I noticed it, and it was only a few years ago. You know, there are some people who are referred to as Ashkenazi. You know, there are some people whose family name is Ashkenazi. Many Sephardim have the name Ashkenazi. You know how they spell it? N-A-Z-I at the end of the word. I would think they would even maybe spell it N-A-S-I, you know. Make some distinction. No. It's spelled N-A-Z-I. I would surely think I'd change my name if I had that, you know, that kind of name. No. That name continues on, generation after generation. It's part of Jewish history. Ashkenaz, mentioned in the Torah long before Mount Sinai. First two letters give it all away. The first two letters is Aleph Shin. You know what that means? Fire. Fire. So if we are to explore the origins of this terrible word, terrible meaning, I'm afraid we're going to have to look right into our own backyard. And now I come to another verse in the Bible. If that didn't shock you, I think this one will. At least we have some answer as to why. Some answer as to why this disease exists. In Genesis, a section that we read only a few weeks ago, chapter 33, in the section known as Vayishlach. This section is dealing with the reunion between Esau and Jacob, two brothers, who were born of one father and one mother as twins, and whom Esau felt that Jacob had deprived and stolen the rightful blessing that he deserved. And was determined to eliminate Jacob. And now for the first time again, after the incident, at which time Esau declared that he would eliminate Jacob because he felt he had stolen the blessing of the birthright, which he incidentally had sold, but we're not going into that aspect of the discussion here. But here they are going to meet again for the first time. And in the section preceding, in chapter 32, there's a discussion on how Jacob sets up logistically his camp, that if Esau, coming with his hordes of people to eliminate Jacob, if he were to succeed in his first invasion of Jacob's camp, then the others would be able to run away. And he had set it up logistically how some members of the family might be survivors. And they finally meet. And Esau runs towards him, towards Jacob, Vaychapkeu, and embraces him, Vayipol al savarav, and falls on his neck, Vayishakeu, and he kisses him. Vayifku, and they both begin to cry. A remarkable scene. A man bent on the destruction of his brother, coming with this army of people to accomplish that particular goal, meets up with him, hugs him, kisses him, and even weeps at this long, because they had been separated some 22 years. Something gone wrong here. But in addition, there is something very strange about this particular verse. If you are not familiar with the idea of the scroll, there are no vowels in the scroll. There are no musical notes in the scroll. All you find in the scroll that was handed down on Mount Sinai are the letters, sometimes large, sometimes small, letters and the parchment. That's it. Never dots, which in Hebrew indicate vowels. But in this particular verse, this word, and he kissed him, and he kissed him. This word contains 6 letters. And on each of the 6 letters, above each of the 6 letters, there is a dot, which does not serve as a vowel and really has no place being there in the first place. And Rashi, famous, great commentator on the Bible, gives us a reason, which is totally inexplicable, as most of Rashi is. For those of you familiar, he is too concise, too abstruse to really understand him. Without Kabbalah, forget Rashi's commentary on the Bible is totally misunderstood without the study of Kabbalah. And strangely enough, he brings as a source for his reasoning as to why these letters, dots appear above these 6 letters, he brings none other than Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai from the Talmud. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was not only the author of the Zohar, the essential book of Kabbalah, but he is also found more times than any other sage in the Talmud. Now, I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, may have never heard of this particular statement by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because I think more or less you're kind of going to be maybe angry. So let me not keep you in any further suspense. Amar Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, halachahu. You know what a halacha means? A rule. Rule. Like there are rules, principles. This is a rule. This is a law. Halacha means law. This is not an opinion or a feeling. It's a natural law of the universe. Ki yadua she'esav soneh liYaakov. Esau, representing the non-Jew, eternally, consistently hates Jacob the Jew. That's a devastating statement. For most of us who know Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai intimately well, we know that the ultimate objective of his teaching of Kabbalah was to bring peace on earth and goodwill towards all men. This is the objective of Kabbalah. This is what's stated by Moses in the section of page 125, in the section of Bamidbar, in Numbers, in the Zohar, that the Zohar will bring peace on earth and goodwill towards men. And the same author whose entire work is to bring an understanding amongst the people of the world, makes this striking declaration that there is a halacha, a natural law in this universe, that Esau, a non-Jew, hates the Jew. On the surface, it sounds awful. Why should there be the creation of such a law in this universe? And if this law, halakha, he's not speaking of intent, he's not speaking of feelings, he places this statement in a frame of reference as a law, halakha. And to make and create further confusion, Rashi continues, Ela shem nichmeru rachamav ba'oto sha'a v'nashku b'kolibo. That's the reason why these dots are there, and Rashi doesn't explain it. That the reason the dots are there, because when Esau embraced Jacob, he embraced him with a compassion which is indescribable, a compassion of love that men rarely achieve. The ardent hater, the eternal hater of Jacob, there are two diseases that exist in this world, two medical diseases that exist in this world that are referred to as Jewish diseases. Why do we say Jewish diseases? Because it is prevalent amongst Jews and not non-Jews. One is the Tay-Sachs disease, and the other one is this, which is referred to as dysautonomia, a muscular disease. That's as much as I can share with you. If you feel you want further research on the matter, feel free to explore it. Diseases that belong to the Jewish people. There is something like that exists in this world. A Jewish disease, confined to Jews. We know about plagues. We know about quarantine, black plagues in the past, etc. They quarantine people. Many times they try to eliminate these people, and rightfully so, maybe. Because if these people were not quarantined, if these people were not placed in a certain area, not being approached by any medical assistance for fear that the people who might be attending these people might also contract the disease. And so they were left to die. Because no one wanted to contract the disease. There is a disease known as anti-Semitism. But my friends, exploring the text in the tractate of the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud, in a section known as Gittin, divorces. But there is a section that deals with the destruction of the Holy Temple. And the sages delve into the reasons as to why the temple was destroyed. Was it destroyed by the Romans? Of course not, they say. Yes, the effect was the Romans ultimately destroyed the temple. Or Babylonians ultimately destroyed the temple. However, that was not the cause for the destruction of the temple. What was the cause of the destruction of the temple, my friends? Anti-Semitism. What do you mean anti-Semitism? The hatred of one Jew to another brought about the destruction of the temple. Anti-Semitism not only began with the Jew in the wilderness, but this anti-Semitic feeling, meaning what? Anti-Jewish. Jews are the worst perpetrators of anti-Semitism. Says the Talmud, it is a Jewish disease. Because the hate for no reason, we're discussing Neo-Nazism is a disease that hates, and there's no reason. We know, the Jews know, that we do not require the blood of a Christian child for the Passover sacrifice. We know that the Jews do not congregate in some convention and create a conspiracy as how to destroy the world. We know that. That's hatred for no reason. There is no basis, is what we claim, is what our retort is to the anti-Semite, the neo-Nazi. What do you want from us? And his reply is, I've caught the disease that originated with the Jew. Do you know what Sinat Hinam means? Sinat Hinam was what brought the destruction of the temple to its final conclusion. It was not, as in some cases, a competitor might go berserk and kill off another competitor because he's driving him out of business. Or someone hurts me, and so I hate that individual for what he has done to me. But Sinat Hinam, says the Talmud, is where there is no basis, no valid reason for hating. It is the same idea that we respond to all those who profess, activate, exemplify anti-Semitism for no reason. What did we do to them? Is what people pleaded before they went to the gas ovens. What did I do to you? My friends, the Talmud says that's exactly what brought the destruction of the temple. One Jew was telling the other, what did I do to you that you hate me? Sinat Hinam originated with the Jew. And says the Rabbi Isaac Luria, we have a name for those Jews. These Nazis, Erev Rav, they are the hateful Jew for no reason. And therefore when we raise the question as why do they hate us? And the reasons they give we know are unfounded. Even the idea, the attempt to deny the existence of the Jewish people is another reason this David Irving is denying the Holocaust. Do you know why he's denying the Holocaust? Because in his denial of the Holocaust, he then denies that there are even Jews that exist. He wants to deny the existence of these people as some humans that roam the face of the earth. Why? Because that same denial of one Jew to another, that same denial of one Jew to another, is the reason why the temple was destroyed. Why there could be no connection to the light. It wasn't God's design to destroy the temple. People lost contact with the light force. The symptom, when we observe anti-Semitism around the world, we are the perpetrators. We, in our behavior of one Jew to another, as it was 2,400 years ago, as it was 3,400 years ago, written documents as to the unreasonable, without foundation, hatred of one Jew to another. We are the cause. And I might as well prepare you or prepare myself for a question that will be raised. With this kind of talk, do you realize how we can justify anti-Semitism? We are the disease spreaders. My friends, long before I was born, there was anti-Semitism. Whom are you going to blame for the past 3,000 years? Maybe the Jew, as he always finds a scapegoat, as we find now others looking for the scapegoat, and we are the scapegoat. We also look for the scapegoat. Throughout history, Jews have always sought a scapegoat. And that disease has spread around the world. Do I fear an upsurge in anti-Semitism? My friends, whether I delivered and shared this information with you this evening or didn't, in no way can we expect, with the ongoing rise in Neo-Nazism, that it will fade away or go away. It hasn't disappeared in the past, nor will it disappear in the future, unless we understand where it originates and what can we do about it. Far more important as to even its origin, as to who is the perpetrator of this disease, and it is the Jew. The moment that Jew would cease to hate his fellow Jew, according to the Talmud, anti-Semitism would be a disease unheard of. That is the words of the Talmud. So I'm not giving you my opinion as to whom I believe is the perpetrator of this disease. It is no less a disease as Tay-Sachs, confined to the Jewish people, confined to the Ashkenazi Jew, incidentally. Is that a reflection? Take it as you wish. Those are the facts. I did not discover this Tay-Sachs disease, nor did I create the clinical testing and mold it, blend it my way of thinking. This has been done long before I thought of Kabbalah. It is a Jewish disease. What is its antidote? That's what I want to share with you this evening. But before you understand the problem, before we can get to the root and origin of the disease, we can never eliminate the disease. Let us now return to this verse, which seems so confusing. What is Rabbi Shimon making an attempt to share with us? In Numbers, in the section of Pinhas, read on the holiday of Sukkot. I have to admit to you that before I entered the world of Kabbalah, never did I understand what the purpose of this idea was, nor what the intent or conclusion of what can we expect from its actual sacrifice. But it says the following in chapter 29, verse 12, that on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei, the month that Rosh Hashanah falls, Rosh Hashanah is on the first day, and on the 15th day, there occurs a holiday known as Sukkot. And it says, the first day and the following 6 days, each of these days, 13 rams were brought on the first day for sacrifices, without getting into the details as to what is the secret behind sacrifices. Certainly not to appease God, certainly not to make God feel that we love Him. So without delving into that idea, but the essential idea which relates to our discussion this evening. On the first day, 13. The second day, 12. Third day, 11. And so on until the 7th day. Or a total of 70 sacrifices. That's all it says, my friends. If you look at these verses in its literal sense, you will find merely the instructions concerning bringing sacrifices. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai concerning these 7 days. These 70 sacrifices were brought for the purpose of all human beings. All of the 70 nations, they are grouped into 70 groups. All peoples that inhabit planet Earth. 70 nations. Each one, says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, each one, so as to feel a fulfillment of spiritual nourishment, which consequently would manifest itself into physical satisfaction, in which there would be no need for wars, in which there would be no illness, in which all of the difficulties and havoc and chaos that we experience almost every day, whether Jew or non-Jew, did not exist as long as these 70 sacrifices were brought on Sukkot. Says Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Because the temple did not serve just the Jew. The temple was a vehicle, a channel, by which the world would be flooded with the light force of God. And when the world is flooded with the light force of God, there is no chaos, there is no illness, there is no financial instability, etc. And just as the Jew had to be concerned about himself, he equally had to be concerned for his non-Jewish neighbor. No less than for himself. And as long as that requirement was not met, if for reason of sinat hinam, if for the reason of hatred of one Jew towards another, then in effect what happened? The disease became prevalent. The disease of hatred spread all around the world because the light no longer was felt by all peoples of the world. Consequently, what the Rabbi Shimon is saying when he says that Esau eternally hates Jacob, that if Jacob hates Jacob, then the halacha is, the rule is, then the rule is that Esau hates Jacob. But what is remarkable is that the reason, says the Zohar, why there are dots on top of these letters, because it is the obligation that when the temple does not exist, and when we come to the synagogue on Shabbat, we, those dots, represent for us the connection to the light force by which Jacob, by flooding Esau with the light force of God, created such compassion. By spreading the light force of God, by pervading the universe as Jacob could in his day, even Esau, the ardent enemy of Jacob, rightfully so, because he claimed he stole his birthright, the blessing of the birthright. He had a legitimate reason, not as the Jew who can hate for no reason. But if he is overwhelmed, as the dots indicate, the light force of God, then and only then will follow what happened in the case of Jacob. He embraced him with such compassion, kissed him with all his heart, not a phony kiss, not a kiss to make up. He felt the kinship. He felt this was his brother. That's what happens to an anti-Semite. Spread the light. And it is incredible as to what happens when the light is turned on. And to conclude, I would like to share with you a living example of what the light of the Zohar can do to this world. You want to remove anti-Semitism? Forget your demonstrations. Forget enacting new laws. You're treating the symptoms, and you're treating it with lollipops. To remove the scourge of hatred, of which anti-Semitism is yet but one form of hatred, although it is a hatred without reason. That is correct. But the origin begins because the Jew is not providing this universe with the light force of God. And therefore it will continue to the end of days without any change, I assure you. Because for 3,400 years it hasn't changed. Why do we believe today with demonstration, enacting new governmental laws, things will change? We have to be idiots. How long do you have to learn? You mean 3,400? I mean, you become a doctor after 6 years or 8 years. I mean, we're trying to learn now for 3,400 years and we still haven't learned the lesson. But is it the only lesson that if we don't learn, then we will never eliminate the scourge of anti-Neo-Nazism? And the proof, the living proof of the effect of what Zohar is, it's not merely religiosity, it's for the world. When the Nazis invaded North Africa, the great field Marshal General Edwin Rommel invaded North Africa, took North Africa like a piece of cake, when, like lightning, to Egypt, reached Egypt, wasn't far away from Jerusalem, in no time. But on his way, there was the first priority. It was one priority. And you know what that priority was. In case you hadn't learned yet. The German war machine had one priority before winning the war. And that was what? The elimination of the Jew. A priority that superseded the needs of the German army. That if there was a trainload of Jews ready to be deported to the gas ovens, and there was a call from the front for medical supplies, do you know where they shifted that train to? Not with medical supplies to the front, but to that ghetto where Jews were assembled to take them to the gas ovens. If there was a cry of the German army for food, and there was a transport of Jews waiting, do you know who had priority? The Jew. That train would be used for the transportation of Jews to the gas ovens. And consequently, the great Field Marshal Rommel came to the King of Morocco, who had no army, period. No self-defense, period. And came to him with his million-strong army. And says, Your Majesty, I demand the transfer of all your Jewish citizens to become my property. Imagine, this is not an educated European. You're talking about a primitive Arab. So we think, a primitive Arab. Least of all would think of standing up to this Field Marshal Rommel. What was his particular love for the Jews, which he incidentally had? And to what avail would there be if he put up and was stubborn to say, no, I won't transfer my Jewish subjects into your possession. Without an army, a million Nazis lined up with the most advanced modern warfare equipment. What kind of a chance did the Jews have? And you know what happened, my friends? This is history. This primitive king, Moroccan king, said to Field Marshal Rommel, I refuse to give up my subjects. And you know what happened with that statement, my friend? It is history. Field Marshal Edwin Rommel walked out of the castle. This is a story that has never been yet explained. How these 250,000 Moroccan Jews escaped the death chambers. No one has come up with a logical answer. But I kind of like to believe, maybe in my illusionary world, that at that time in Morocco, there wasn't a Jewish family that did not possess a Zohar. Now, if you've got a better answer for that, I'd like to hear it. And I've been exploring, I've been examining that incident. I haven't come up with any other explanation. If the soul can do that, you know what? It might even work. It might even bring the light to this world that can finally and ultimately remove the Jewish disease of anti-Semitism. Thank you.
Rabbi Berg will be pleased to respond to any questions you have that are pertinent to the subject of the presentation tonight. So we'll take a few questions from the audience.
In the back. I'm not sure I understood the question. Did you repeat that question, sir? Did you understand?
We were able to,
Did you understand
to hear
the
it.
question? No. Could you come up forward here then? Okay. Oh, it's a code name for the non-Jewish people. If is that your question? Or according to the Zohar, all the words of the Torah are codes. The codes, and the Zohar explains what each word defines, represents, etc. And Esau represents the non-Jewish people, even though they were twins. Yes. Good observation, but nevertheless, that is the way it's explained in the Talmud and the Zohar. And they go into lengthy explanations to explain as to how and why, and etc. But I understand your question. Okay. That is correct. That is correct. More specifically, the way that is explained only because the Hebrew name for Germany is Ashkenaz. Strange as it may sound. Now this originated, and this idea didn't begin with the Nazi movement in 1933. And as I already explained in my Wheels of a Soul, that there are 7 regions in this universe, 7 regions, in which there is what we call global reincarnation. In other words, particular people will be drawn to particular regions. The reason why we have seen the devastation, wars, continuous wars over the millennium, not only in 1933 and World War II, World War I, always originating. World wars originate in Europe, the center of which is Germany. Why? Because they are the direct lineage of that aspect known as Edom, of which is another code for Esau. That, according to the Zohar, unfortunately, is ourselves, the evil instinct in ourselves, not Esau. Good point.
In which sun is considered feminine and the moon is considered masculine.
We'll just let that go. No affirmation or refutation. Yes, many. Many. Many.
Here about the Jew eating the other Jew, in case of the temple being destroyed. You saying that maybe it was the Romans who did it, but in actuality it was the hatred of the Jew against the other Jew. Could you elaborate on that? Could you give an example whereby you can see a Jew in personality form?
If I can even simplify it, I follow your question. If I can simplify it, who goes to, well, you're a criminal trial lawyer, who goes on trial, the gun or the one who pulled the trigger? But it wasn't the man who, wasn't the man, he didn't kill him. Wasn't the gun? It's the same analogy. Yes, the Romans pulled it. The Romans were the trigger. Yes, that killed, that destroyed. Not I say that. That's what the Talmud says.
I am from Morocco and support what you were saying from my book. Yes, besides having the Zohar in our home, I don't remember knowing the family where the grandfather was on Kabbalah or studying Kabbalah. It was natural and normal to us. Now it's the most important. Well, I don't remember knowing that there were any different types of Jews living in Morocco, like Ashkenaz, Sephardic, or anything like that until we came here. There were just Jews from Europe, or Jews from the United States, or...
Isn't it strange that I never knew that there was a Sephardic Jew? One of my best friends in school was Sephardic, but I didn't know that's what you call them. So I didn't know that. But what I would like to add is Morocco is one of the areas that I frequent very often, being a very close friend of the monarch there, and it is so heavy with energy that to the extent that Rabbi Isaac Luria, and this was unbeknown to me until I made my first trip to Morocco, Rabbi Isaac Luria sent his 10 best students to Morocco over 400 years ago, because the power, the force, the energy that these Kabbalists that lived, David Moshe, you know him? That's a dangerous place to get to. But you can feel it. You can feel it. How this monarch had no reason to support the Jews, supposedly. But he knows that's his strength.
If Zohar is of such great importance, almost a difference between life and death, why isn't Kabbalah taught in more temples, except just here? I'm thrilled that I have found you.
I guess it's beginning. I had a local rabbi here, one of the famous leading rabbis of Los Angeles, visiting me here today, and I think that their appreciation of what the future requires has already arrived.